3 o'clock. It's the Postgame show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips today or tomorrow or Wednesday. He's on vacation. He's at the beach, and I'm jealous. But I get to hang out here with you guys for the next 3 hours, all the way up until 6 o'clock, so I'm in a pretty good spot myself. Thank you guys for joining in. We have a fun show planned today. A lot going on, a lot of South Carolina football talk. We're going to talk about the big E word today. No, and that's not Elijah, as much as I'd like that to be considered the big E word. Today, we're talking a lot about expectations and what our expectations for the South Carolina football team is, since we're getting a lot closer to media days. Look, we have next week, and then after next week, we'll be in Atlanta for SEC Media Days, talking about expectations for everybody and getting the skinny on the SEC and other teams that are on Carolina's schedule, because I got plenty of thoughts about that. Ben Portnoy from the Sports Business Journal is going to be joining me in studio for the 4 o'clock hour. Excited to have Ben on because there's a lot of stuff going on, not just with the business of college athletics, but other college football storylines too. And talk with Ben about a lot of things about the new landscape of college football and how certain teams are looking at it as well. There was a story from Chris Hummer at CBS Sports where he detailed a lot of the specifics of Florida State's post-house settlement contracts that they are signing, their revenue-sharing contracts that they're having players sign. And a lot of it seems pretty one-sided, so we'll get into that with Ben Portnoy and a whole lot more. A fun start bench drop that I came up with today that I think should have some mixed results, including here's Gamecock football team. After a 9-win season that took a lot of the SEC by surprise, where you realize this team was maybe more for real than we all would have expected coming into the season, right? Last year, I think they were 12th or 13th total in terms of the media poll at the end of SEC Media Days. I know I had that team, I had that South Carolina team outside of the top 10, and sure enough, they finished well inside the top 10, and they were on the cusp of reaching the first ever 12-team college football playoff. So that inspires this question today. It was pretty simple. At 107.5 The Game, it's pinned to the top of the profile, so you don't have to dig very far into the profile. You can just click on it, and there'll be the first tweet you see. What's your expectation level going into 2025 for the Gamecocks? College football playoff or bust? Getting at least 8 wins? Going 500 or better? Or admitting that you have zero clue? And that's totally fair. In today's landscape of college football, there's so much roster turnover. This team specifically on the defensive side of the ball has a lot of turnover, and you're having to replace a bevy of players that are playing in the NFL now. And guys like Demetrius Knight and Kyle Kennard and Tonka Hemingway and Nick Emmett-Worry and TJ Sanders, to quote Rick Pitino, they're not walking through that door. You got to replace all of those guys. How well they do that, I think, is going to define this season for the Gamecocks, considering you still are really set at a lot of positions you feel good about, like quarterback and edge rusher. But right now, we've got 164 votes so far, so a decent sample size. 59% say at least 8 wins. 29% say it's college football playoff or bust. 8% are saying 500 or better. 4% still have yet to have a clue. So chime in, call us in, 803-404-6100, or hit us up at the Firehouse Subs text line. We'll be talking about that a lot throughout the day. And for me, if I'm voting on this, I'm saying at least 8 wins. I'm leaving some margin for error with this team, because I expect them to be incredibly competitive in every game. I think this might be one of those years where it can be defined by how you are in one-score games. There are some teams that go 7-5 in years but are really good but had bad luck in one-score games, or teams that are 10-2 that get to 10 wins by virtue of maybe having the ball bounce their way correctly a few times. This team can be one of those. I expect them to be in a ton of close games because of the competitiveness of this league and how close I think a lot of teams are in this league. I look at the SEC and I kind of break them into tiers, and I try to do that every year. And going into media days this year, I kind of look at it as like Texas and Georgia, and then you got about a 6 or 7 team clump below that in another tier. And then you can break it off after that in smaller groups, but the largest group might be that middle class of the SEC. I expect LSU to be a lot better. I don't know really what to think of what Alabama's offense is going to be, because that's going to be really contingent on how Ty Simpson is at quarterback. Oklahoma retooled on offense. And I've got quite a few teams, I think, in this league that in terms of the complete picture, how good they're going to be. Now, Mississippi State still I expect to struggle pretty good. Kentucky, I think they might be the worst team in the SEC. But even your Vanderbilts, right? Hard team to kind of project going into 2025 because they bring a lot back, but you also have to ask the question of how good are they going to be this year with the guys they bring back? Was last year a fluke? Did they benefit maybe from winning some one-score games? I can think of a few games that they won by one score that I don't know when they get those rematches this year if they yield the same result. I don't know if they go to Alabama and pull off a win. I don't think they do. That's one win they would have had last year. I don't know if they're able to pull out some of those games in conference. I mean, I expect them to be better than Kentucky, but Vanderbilt's an interesting in the offseason. They added a ton to that wide receiver room, and I've said plenty of times on this show how much I like what they did to that wide receiver room to give Garrett Nussmeier, already a really good quarterback, everything that guy needs to be successful going into next year. But what Brian Kelly coach teams look like on paper and what they end up being at the end of the year oftentimes can be two completely different things. Because I think we had a very similar discussion about the Tigers last year, and the defense improved only by virtue of being so bad in 23 that they couldn't have gotten worse. But that game under the lights at Tiger Stadium, because I still believe that one's going to be a night game. I know it's a flex game, but you can't convince me it's not going to be played under the lights, is going to be a really tough task. But when I look at this South Carolina schedule, and I take into account the questions I have for a lot of other SEC teams, and I'll get into that in the 5 o'clock hour of the questions I have for every SEC team, I look at the schedule and I see 4 games that I think can make or break the South Carolina season. And 2 of them are back-to-back, starting with one in September against Missouri on the road. Every Gamecock fan listening to this, you're listening to this and you're getting flashbacks about bad games in Columbia, Missouri, with the exception of the thriller in the early 2010s where Connor Shaw and Dylan Thompson both throw for over 200 yards. That place has been kind of a house of horrors for this program. Eli Drinkwitz has had this program's number until last year. But if Missouri, when you catch them early, do you catch them early enough before they gel? Because you look at Missouri on paper, they replace so much on offense, and there's a lot of unproven talent. Now, still really good talent, just unproven. How good this Missouri team is going to be is a really big question mark. I think we all knew Missouri was going to be really good last year because of what they returned. I like Bo Prabula at quarterback a lot. I think in the small sample size we saw of him at Penn State, you can reasonably expect that offense to be solid. Does he fit with what Eli wants to do on offense there? It's a whole other thing. So I remember we had Clark Brooks on about a month or 2 ago, and he was talking about when you look at this Missouri team, does the Eli Drinkwitz offense fit Bo Prabula's skill set? He seemed to be a little hesitant to commit to saying it would fit. This is one of those situations where play style and scheme kind of have to be married. But that's a big question mark going into the season, something I'd like to hear addressed at SEC Media Days by Eli Drinkwitz about how that offense looks. But because of the history of the series, and it being a road game, and it really being your first true road test, that's a 50-50 game for me. Another one is going to be the Alabama and Oklahoma games here. I think Oklahoma first, then Alabama, back-to-back at Williams-Brice in October. In Oklahoma and Alabama, I have very similar question marks about. I've got zero doubt that Alabama and Oklahoma's defenses are going to be great. Brent Venables is coaching that defense for Oklahoma. They're going to be really good. It's an Alabama defense at a school that recruits at a high level, regardless if Nick Saban's coaching or Kalen DeBoer is coaching. But they have the question mark at quarterback is Alabama, because Ty Simpson's been there for a while. Is he good enough to get the most out of a Ryan Williams? Is that offensive line good enough to create a running game? Good enough to make it to where quarterback play might not matter? Now, Alabama probably has the best offensive line on paper in America. Can they run block well enough to maybe put a running back like not Justice Haynes, but Jam Miller, and elevate him to being a 1,000+ yard rusher? Because when you look at Alabama teams in the past, they've won titles with Greg McElroy and Jake Coker at quarterback, but their running backs were Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry. Those fellas won Heismans. And they had dominant defenses. Helps when you're able to marry a great running game with a great defense. Winning games the old school way. I am not convinced if Alabama's got enough in the running game to make that up if Ty Simpson is not a really good quarterback. Alabama's gettable, and it's a road game. And if there's anything we know about Kalen DeBoer coach teams, they can maybe underperform on the road, even if they're favored to win. So I do kind of lean South Carolina in that direction. But if Ty Simpson comes out looking like Tua Tagovailoa or Jalen Hurts, it's going to be a tougher battle. Oklahoma is one I feel more confident in the opponent when it comes to comparing those two. Because I like what Oklahoma brought in. I think John Mateer is a really good quarterback. I think Jay Knott is a fantastic running back. That might be one of the most underrated transfer portal signings in the SEC this year. That one I see as a true 50-50. I don't think you're going to see what happened in Norman last year happen at Willie B this year, where South Carolina's got this thing wrapped up after 3 possessions in the first quarter. I think we'll have a little bit better of a game. I truly see Oklahoma and Alabama as being toss-ups as well. So you got the Missouri game on the road, Oklahoma, Alabama, and the one that I'm still really struggling to kind of project this far from in the future, Texas A&M in November, because it's a road game. A&M's a hard place to win. Now, the Gamecocks have had their number the last 2 times here at Williams-Brice Stadium. A&M did a good job of at least adding to the weapons, but that's a team that still predicates their offense on the run game and having really good defenses. Mike Elko, in the same vein of Brent Venables, of Mike Elko's coaching, I expect them to have a really good defense. And they return some dudes on that side of the ball. Are you going to be able to score enough points on the road in a hostile environment against a really good defense to pull that game out? It's tough because you're getting A&M in November. Historically, A&M 8-4. That's the running joke, not just on this show, but everywhere in SEC circles, is that grass is green, water is wet. The Texas A&M Aggies are 8-4. So if they're 8-1 coming into that game, or 7-1, however the schedule falls, then maybe you get A&M on the downslide to where they usually come back to earth late in the season. But you got to do it there. And I think by virtue of playing that game on the road makes it significantly harder to have to project this far out. But those are the 4 games that when I try to level set expectations, I take into account as toss-ups. I think you go 2-2 of those games, you're looking at 8-4. If you go 1-3 in those games, you're in the neighborhood of 7-5, maybe 6-6. And maybe those people that vote 500 or better probably have more realistic expectations, depending on how those 4 games fall. So we'll be taking those, your thoughts on what your expectations are for the Gamecocks this year, all show long, 803-404-6100. On the other side, we'll talk about Lenore Sellers. Maybe not a player in the country with more hype given the Bruce Feldman story, given the way he ended last season. He was on Zach Gelb's show last week talking about those expectations. So we'll hear what Lenore's had to say. We'll also give you today's start bench drop. All that and more as you're listening to a Monday edition of the Postgame Show. Talking Gamecock football expectations, Lenora Sellers and a start bench drop and a whole lot more here today on the post-game show. Chris weighs in on the text line. He says, my expectation for my alma mater is one game different today than when I was in school in the early 90s when the goal was just to get to bowl eligibility. Today, my expectation is 7 regular season wins being the floor. I think a lot of people feel that too. Look, I think that's kind of just by virtue of what happened last year, right? Like you made a jump that nobody expected you to make, right? You went from going 5-7 in 2023 to having a quarterback who has never started a game in his collegiate career, having that first game at Old Dominion, which I think scared a lot of folks around here, and then reeling off 6 straight wins to end the regular season. Lenora Sellers putting insane numbers up and putting up a highlight reel for a first-year starter that you wouldn't believe, and then having all this type of buzz and hype around him and being talked about as a legitimate Heisman candidate going into the next year makes you feel really good about where the program is heading. And I think Jay and I, we've talked about this a lot, that, you know, it's harder to get from 5 wins. It's hard. It's not, well, let me rephrase this. Getting from 5 wins to 9 wins is hard, but getting from 9 wins to 10 and 11 might be harder, especially in a league like the SEC. It's going to be hard to make that jump, and you got to replace a lot on defense. And I think when you have a quarterback as good as Lenora, so you have an edge rusher as good as Dylan, you look at the roster and you think you've got one of the best quarterbacks in the sport. You've got arguably the best at getting to the other team's quarterback in the sport. That gives you a really good baseline. And I've always thought if you have those two positions well accounted for going into the season, then your basement, rather, is probably 7 wins, right? Things can go wrong during the season. I mentioned in the first segment, there are plenty of teams in the history of college football that are 7-5, but have about 3 one-score losses that kept them from being in contention for their conference. That happens a ton. And that's one of the reasons why I think Virginia Tech will be a really close game to start the year, because I think Virginia Tech was one of those teams. I thought that was a solid team that had some really bad luck in close games and really made their record look worse than maybe how good the team actually was. So that might end up being the case for South Carolina this year, especially when you have that many games that we can all perceive as maybe toss-ups. Another texter, an anonymous texter here on the text line, says, I think 8 wins would be okay, but a disappointing year. But when you go 9-3 last year and you bring back some of the star players you do, yeah, I think a lot of people will share that very sentiment right there. No Jay Phillips today, but that does not mean we're going to avoid doing a start bench drop. Love doing these every day. And I was thinking about a good one today, and I thought, the college sports viewing experience is a lot different now than it ever has been. It's one of the reasons why college sports are so lucrative, right? We have multi-billion-dollar deals for things like the college football playoff, the NCAA basketball tournament, and the baseball tournament has grown exponentially over the last few years. So that kind of led me to today's start bench drop. You are starting, benching, and dropping these 3 college athletic postseason formats: the college football playoff, the NCAA basketball tournament, men and women's, and the NCAA baseball tournament. Now, there are pros and cons to all of these. I love every single one of them, and I think they're all great viewing experiences. For the college football playoff, for instance, even when it was a 4-team playoff, I would have still included it in this, because one of my favorite days of the calendar year, even with a 12-teamer, is the day that you get the semifinals. And that's usually New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. But having that day where it's back-to-back games to decide who plays in the national title game have been my favorite for the last decade. Ever since the college football playoff has been instituted, I've loved that day of that semifinal alone. It gives you the same kind of rush that you get for the Final Four, where it's just 2 games in one day to determine who plays for the title game, and it's a day's worth of watching football. I love it. I absolutely love it. And what the 12-team playoff has done is given us some really good matchups, put some of these games in home stadiums for teams, and it changes the viewing experience. And I think with maybe changing the seating, doing that little tweak this year, we're just going to get better matchups in that first weekend of the college football playoff. So I'm really excited for that, just by even looking at what it would have been this year with the new seating format. You look at some of those matchups and you're like, man, I really would have loved to have seen that. So it probably produces better games. And I think it's going to this year as well. And then the NCAA basketball tournament speaks for itself. If you are a basketball lover like myself, or even if you're just a casual fan, it's all day basketball action. And I think it's oftentimes referred to as the most popular day for men to get vasectomies in America because they can go home and have an excuse to do nothing but lay around and watch basketball all day from noon all the way up until the last game tips off, which is usually close to 10 o'clock. It's basketball all day for those first couple of rounds. And then you get some awesome matchups for the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and the Final Four is awesome, and it really speaks for itself. And then the college baseball tournament. That one, maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have been as excited to put in this, but the viewing experience for the college baseball tournament has gotten significantly better because of squeeze play. I think squeeze play is one of my favorite things that ESPN has done maybe ever because of just how much better they have made the product itself. I mean, the last 2 years is when I've really gotten into watching squeeze play as opposed to maybe bouncing from game to game, but you get sometimes like the quad box, or sometimes they'll put up like 6 or 7, different games at once, but they do such a good job of bouncing around and showing you when something's happening, when something did happen, if you missed it, and keeping you, engaged in the action all day. Because the college baseball tournament, like the basketball one, the first couple of rounds, and when you get into the baseball one, the regionals, it's all day long. And you have games consistently throughout the afternoon. And they do such a great job at squeeze play of just taking you from action to action. And that, I think, that has significantly enhanced the viewing experience for the NCAA baseball tournament. So if you're one of those that has never watched the college baseball tournament that way, you absolutely have to next season. Honestly, it makes the ESPN Plus subscription worth it itself to be able to watch squeeze play. And it gives it kind of that NCAA tournament feel back before you could watch games on True TV or TNT and TBS, when CBS was really taking you from action to action, where you get one game, but if that one's a blowout, they would take you to one that's a lot closer. That adrenaline you get from watching it is very, very apparent, and it's a really great viewing experience. So that's today's start, bench, drop, and I've already changed my mind as to what my order is going to be. I'll give that later in the show, but when I first thought about this, I was like, okay, this, I think I know what this is. And then once we got to it, I talked myself into switching some things around. So 3 playoff experiences, viewing experiences, the college football playoff, the NCAA basketball tournament, men's and women's, because I think ESPN for the women's tournament has done a much better job too in terms of its viewing experience, and the college baseball tournament. So feel free to weigh in on that on our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Still taking your thoughts on expectations for the football team this year. And coming up next, we'll dive into one player specifically who I think we have more expectations for than anybody else, not just for South Carolina, but maybe in the SEC. Bruce Feldman wrote an incredible article kind of detailing his meteoric rise from the last 6 weeks of last year into what to maybe expect this season. And as a part of having the way to end the year last year, like Lenoris did, you're going to have your own media tour, right? Obviously, I alluded to the Bruce Feldman article. He was on Zach Gelb's show, a national radio show, last week, and he talked about a lot of things that we've been discussing in this market as well, handling those expectations, playing for Coach Beamer, and getting a little more, learning more about the quarterback for the South Carolina Gamecocks. We'll discuss that, play some of the sound from that, hear what he had to say, and what that might mean for the Gamecocks in 2025 in terms of how we're going to level set expectations. All of that and a whole lot more as you're listening to the Postgame Show. If you guys like deals as much as I do, and I know you do, there's no better deal that we have here at Cumulus Media than the craft beer card. Only $59. So you can save about $300. Just go to 1075.com, click on Sweet Deals, and then you'll find out how you can get that craft beer card. I'm trying to get my filthy mitts on a couple of those myself because it is a really cool deal. And the cool thing, you can use it for food too. So discounted food, discounted beer, can't go wrong with either of those. Now, I talked about in the last segment, as it pertains to expectations for the season, a lot of those are going to be based on the return of Lenora Sellers, returning a quarterback who had maybe the best 6-week stretch to end the season as any quarterback in America. It's one of those deals where Jordan Kay talked about it way back in about late December, early January, when we were talking about the way too early top 25s that had South Carolina really high. And he joked that the way too earlies are usually consisting of two questions. Did you play well to end the year last year? Is your quarterback returning? And for South Carolina, they checked both of those boxes, so naturally they were very high in all of the way too early rankings. But Lenora Sellers is part of that equation. He had a fantastic year to end the year last year, and he's coming back this season with a ton of hype. We talked about the Bruce Feldman article last week where he really goes deep into Lenoris's rise as somebody who was an overlooked high school prospect who came to South Carolina and sat and learned a year behind Spencer Rattler, really got the brunt of a lot of Dow Loggins' frustrations, but Dow saw the potential that Lenoris had and wanted to push him a little bit and get him mentally prepared for the scrutiny that he was going to face as a full-time starter at the SEC level. That seemed to have worked pretty well, and that's why Lenora Sellers is talked about as one of the players who can really be in contention for the Heisman Trophy is if he has a full season the way he had the last 6 games of last year. So with that comes a lot of attention. He's done a lot more media, like talking to Bruce Feldman for The Athletic and also appearing on Zach Gelb's national radio show, and he talked a lot about things that came from that article, because the biggest nugget in the Bruce Feldman story was that there were teams offering Lenora Sellers a lot of money to transfer. There was some capital T tampering going on with schools trying to get Lenora Sellers into the transfer portal to get him to quarterback for their schools next season. One of those deals, reportedly, 2 years, $8 million, $4 million a year. It's a lot of money. That's Carson Beck money. Carson Beck's making a ton of money to be the quarterback at Miami next season. And this unidentified program thought highly enough of Lenoris to offer him a similar deal, but over the course of 2 years. He was a hot commodity. He chose to stay. And in this ecosystem of college athletics, sometimes when somebody has a good year somewhere and other schools start calling and offering that type of money, it can be really easy to pack up and go where the money is. But Lenoris was asked about that on Zach Gelb's show, and here was his response to that question and why he decided to stay at South Carolina as opposed to maybe going full Steve Miller band and taking the money and running.
Been more stressful, honestly, if I would have left, because then you got to worry about starting over, meeting new people, building those new relationships. So I didn't look that deep into it. It was just we were still working out. We had spring ball and all that. So I was really focused on that.
Yeah, focusing on returning, and it would be a risk to leave. And I think that's one thing maybe a lot of players who are in the position that Lenoris was in maybe don't take into account. And this is something that I talked with Matt Dowell and Watch Fox a lot on when I was on their podcast last week about what the risk was, about obviously that big part of the Bruce Feldman story of why he decided to stay. Now, clearly there's plenty of reasons personally for Lenoris to stay here, and that is that your family's here, your brother's about to be one of the wide receivers on the team next season. You have already gained a lot of respect within the program, and they're looking to you for a large leadership role. The risk of leaving is really high. Yes, you get the short-term relief of getting the money up front. You get a 2-year deal for $8 million. That's a lot. Hard to turn down. But the risk is going to another place where the offense maybe isn't suited towards your needs, where you have to get reacclimated with an entirely different room of wide receivers, running backs, offensive line, and a whole new coaching staff. And if there's anything I think anybody can learn from talking to people within the world of college football and college athletics is what a coach's recruiting pitch to you in the living room of your home might be different than how they implement things when you get there. I know of so many occasions where a coach tells a player something in terms of how they're going to be used, and they get to campus, and the reality is nowhere near the fantasy that was pitched to them in the recruiting process. So one of these, whichever school it was that offered him this money, could easily get him on campus and say, look, we don't want you breaking the pocket to make plays. We know you're an incredible scrambler, but we don't want you doing that. We want you dropping back and passing 45 times a game. And that might be different than what he wants to do. And Lenoris has an incredible arm, and his accuracy improved as the year went on last year. But part of what makes him great is his ability to escape the pocket. You have to relearn what other coaches are asking of you. You have to relearn what the room around you expects in terms of your weapons, your pass catchers, your running backs. And who knows, you maybe go to a place and they don't have the offensive line support that you thought you would get. And here at South Carolina, you have a left tackle in Josiah Thompson, maybe one of the more under-talked about players going into this season, who, started as a true freshman in the SEC and was a freshman All-American last year. And a guy that is going to be a stalwart left tackle for this program for the next couple of years. He really improved as the year went along. You added some pieces in the transfer portal of guys who were really productive at their previous stops. I'm really excited to see what Boaz Stanley does as a center, and also as a guy who can play left guard or right guard or play tackle if need to. A guy who showed that when he was at Troy could play anywhere on the offensive line. But you like what you have potentially as the starting center in Boaz Stanley and a lot of other returning players that Lenoris is just familiar with in that room. And another part of that familiarity, of course, like I mentioned, the coaches. He was also asked about his relationship with Coach Beamer and what makes him a good coach and how he feels about him coming into this year.
I think he's just like a people's guy. Never too high, never too low, just cool, calm, and collected, and just wants to win. So
cool, calm, and collected, just wants to win. And that's one thing we hear a lot about when we talk to guys like Wes Mitchell, right? When we have Wes on, we ask all the recruiting questions about how the momentum is going with recruiting and what maybe the most commonly heard thing is when it comes to feedback on how this coach is recruiting, other players. And a lot of it is the family atmosphere. And that's a really attractive thing for players to be able to go to a visit, an official visit, and feel like they're already part of that football family. And I think that's reflected with Lenoris, and one of the reasons that you get somebody to stay and turn down $8 million over 2 years is because you have garnered an environment that allows for players and their families to feel like their kids are taken care of, like they're getting taken care of. And Lenoris is here to try to do things at South Carolina that haven't been done before, like going to the college football playoff. And this year presents them a fantastic opportunity to do so. And a Shane Beamer, with the way that he's kind of gotten this program in terms of recruiting and winning, and that number being a guy that at a school like this to have more wins in his first 3 or 4 years than any coach has in their first 3 or 4 years, is a pretty exciting and attractive element to that as well. So why leave when you have that as your head coach? Moving on in this as well, he goes on to be asked, and I thought this was a question I love asking players in general over what their fandoms are and what they think about other quarterbacks, who they maybe model their game after. And of course, Lenoris was asked in the Zach Gelb interview that very same thing.
Growing up, I was a bandwagon. Whoever was
Were you just really watching the quarterbacks? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah. If it was a winning team, they probably had a good quarterback. So,
who were some of your favorite quarterbacks?
Cam Newton in college, I used to watch him a lot. Let's see, obviously Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, those guys, Drew Brees. Those a couple off the top of my head I used to just watch all the time. And then obviously college quarterbacks, but they changed over the years. So.
And just like Lenoris, I also watched a lot of Drew Brees growing up because I was a diehard New Orleans Saints fan. But the Cam Newton thing's interesting because I think that's where there could be some parallels because they kind of play a lot like each other. And now he's got Mike Shula as his offensive coordinator calling the plays, a guy who was the offensive coordinator and play caller for Cam Newton's best season in the NFL, a year that saw him win the MVP and also take the Carolina Panthers to a Super Bowl. Something else we'll be diving into later this summer in terms of what that offense looks like and maybe what things look like here in 2025 for the Gamecocks. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, there's one team in college football that I'm growing increasingly fond of as this year's Arizona State. I'll tell you who I'm thinking of when the postgame show returns. Last year, Arizona State didn't just take the Big 12 by surprise. They took the college football world by surprise. A team that was picked last in their conference did a little better than finishing last in the Big 12. They messed around and they pummeled Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game and got themselves into the college football playoff. And because of the seeding format, they didn't just get into the playoff, they got a bye. And then they got to play Texas in the quarterfinal and gave Texas an absolute thriller of a game. And if they were just there was one stop away on 4th and long from pulling off an upset of Texas and getting Ohio State in the college football playoff semifinal. They were the surprise of college football. They were the team that nobody saw coming, getting a bid into the playoff by virtue of winning their conference. This year, I think there's going to be a team out of the Big 12 that can threaten other really good teams, a team like a Texas, in the college football playoff. This isn't going to be the same type of dark horse that Arizona State was because, again, they were picked last. This team is expected to be pretty good in the Big 12. But the team that I'm thinking this year that can maybe make a run in the college football playoff, not just get to the playoff, but to win games potentially in the playoff, is Texas Tech. Shaheen Giaria of CBS Sports wrote a fantastic article about kind of the rise of Texas Tech football right now. And if you look at the roster and what they have coming back, it's easy to look at them and say, hey, you can win a very winnable conference. But Texas Tech has been able to funnel a ton of money into all of their programs. And a lot of that comes from Cody Campbell, a guy who used to be an offensive lineman for the Red Raiders in the early 2000s, has then made a ton of money in the oil industry, oil in Texas, duh. But he has become an incredibly successful businessman, and he has invested a ton of money into Texas Tech athletics. And you're seeing that athletic department start to make this ascent into a higher level of college athletics than they previously ever were. I mean, this is a football program, mind you, that hasn't won a conference title since 1955. And they've never, ever, in the history of the Big 12 Conference and their championship game, have ever participated in a conference title game. That's going to change this year because Texas Tech will be playing in Dallas in December for a chance to get a bid into the college football playoff, or maybe just further solidify what seed they're going to be if they end up with only one loss or less going into that game. Because Texas Tech had a little bit of an issue on the offensive line last year, both lines of scrimmage. And in Shaheen's story, he mentioned, somebody yelling at Cody Campbell when he's on the sideline saying, hey, how about you buy us an offensive line next year? And he said, I am. And they did. They went portaling for offensive linemen. And they did an incredible job of beefing up that offensive line while also getting a couple of really good edge rushers in the transfer portal too. I think we all here know exactly the effect that Kyle Kennard had on this program and how big of an impact he made last year in helping the South Carolina defense going from pretty good to being great in helping them contend in a wildly successful SEC. Well, Texas Tech's kind of taking a similar route by taking another former Georgia Tech edge rusher, Romello Height, had a fantastic year last year, showed that he could get to the quarterback. They got other defensive linemen as well, and it's just the influx of players in the trenches. Like Texas Tech last year was really good at the skill positions. They had good weapons at receiver. They recruited really well. Baron Morton, I think, is one of the more underrated quarterbacks in college football. They were able to put up a lot of fantastic scoring numbers last season, but they weren't able to really translate that into more than 8 wins. They went 8-4 in the regular season, but that was one of the few losses that Arizona State had last year, was having to play the Red Raiders in Lubbock. They were kind of lucky in some one-score games. Oklahoma State gave them a game that they were able to win by 1 score, and of course Oklahoma State went 0 for the conference. But the way this Texas Tech offense moved last year with a coach like Joey McGuire, who was a guy that took a high school program at Cedar Hill in Texas and turned them into a perennial state champion, he's a really good coach, and he's a builder. And when you look at what Texas Tech did last year, and you look at what they added to the roster, and all the money that's being brought into that athletic department, I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing Texas Tech play in Jerry World in December. Maybe they can be the surprise of the college football season. Hour number 2 of the postgame show coming right up. Hour number 2 of the post-game show starts right now. Having to make some change here. Our pal Ben Portnoy had we can call it a little family emergency. He's not able to come in, so we're thinking about Ben right now. He's not able to come in, so we'll get into some of the news of the day. And there was a trade in the NFL, and I think it's causing a lot of people to scratch their heads. But it's a rare one, too. It's a rare trade in the NFL. Now, it does involve draft picks. Almost all of them do. But almost a direct player-for-player swap, involving one of the biggest names in the sport. The Steelers and Dolphins engaged in a little bit of off-season tomfoolery today, and it was announced that the Dolphins will be sending Pittsburgh Jalen Ramsey, former All-Pro cornerback who won a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams back in 21. I guess that was 22 was when they played the Super Bowl. Super Bowl champion Jalen Ramsey, sending him to Pittsburgh for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now, a guy who's considered one of the best safeties in the NFL, certainly one of the most versatile defensive players in the NFL. I find it really interesting. Of course, there's more to the trade than just Ramsey for Fitzpatrick. I'm reading from The Athletic right now. This is from Diana Rossini and Mike DeFabo and Jana Bardal. And they're kind of laying out the terms of the pick. Quote, the Miami Dolphins traded defensive back Jalen Ramsey, tight end Jonnu Smith, and a 2027 seventh-round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and a 2027 fifth-round draft pick, team sources said. Not oftentimes, on the last day of June, do we get a trade that makes way like this, or that creates, some news, or really kind of changes how you view some of these teams going into next season. And a lot of the takes that I've seen online have kind of been questioning Pittsburgh's angle of this trade. Yes, Minkah Fitzpatrick's a little younger. He's in, I would consider, the prime of his career right now. And you're getting in return a cornerback who is about 30 years old and maybe on the back end of his career, but still pretty efficient. He played all 17 games last year, and sometimes with cornerbacks or just defensive players in general, sometimes your availability is your best ability. And he showed that he could be reliable last year for a Miami Dolphins team that had plenty of injuries to go around. But he played all 17 games last year, picked off a couple passes, and was a pretty helpful player on that defense. Now, Miami didn't have the season they wanted, and a lot of that kind of comes from the inconsistency of the health of Tua Tagovailoa on offense. But the more I've thought about it, the more I like this trade for Pittsburgh. I don't like giving up Minkah Fitzpatrick under any circumstance because I do think he is one of the best safeties in the NFL. He's a total ball hawk. He's a good tackler. Once the ball's in his hands, too, he's not immobile, so he's able to take it to the house. He can turn turnovers into touchdowns. And when you have somebody like Minkah Fitzpatrick on a defense that already has T.J. Watt up front, you're able to force a lot of turnovers. And that's how Pittsburgh's won a lot of games. Now, mind you, Russell Wilson last year was better, but that wasn't Russell Wilson of old. And the offense really kept this team from being able to reach what the standard in Pittsburgh is, which isn't just making the playoffs, it's going deep into the playoffs and contending for Super Bowls. The last few years, the Steelers haven't been anywhere near that. And I don't know maybe if Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey straight up gets you any closer. But the thing that I like about this deal and why I'm warming up to the idea of it, if I were a Pittsburgh Steeler fan, I have no emotional investment in neither the Steelers or Dolphins. But it's the adding of Jonnu Smith into that trade, throwing Jonnu Smith into there. And this is a tight end that, mind you, had a career high, 88 catches last year, over 800 yards receiving. But there's a familiarity that is very valuable in the NFL. And Jonnu Smith is very familiar with Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith was the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans before taking the Atlanta Falcons head coaching job. And the best Arthur Smith offense that he had in Nashville obviously centered around Derrick Henry and that running game. But one of the best weapons that Ryan Tannehill had and one of the best X factors on that offense for that entire season was one Jonnu Smith. Yes, he's a tight end. He can line up on the line of scrimmage and run routes. He's a solid blocker. But how Arthur Smith used him in Tennessee is the way I think more offensive coordinators should use some of their really athletic tight ends, because Jonnu Smith has great size. He's got really good speed. And when covering that Tennessee Titans team back a few years ago, back in 2021, you saw Arthur Smith utilize the tight end position maybe more differently than other offensive coordinators, because Jonnu Smith took handoffs out of the backfield. He put him in motion a lot. There was a lot of that passing game, yes, centered around getting the ball to A.J. Brown. But also, what A.J. Brown did was take the middle of the field and make teams kind of have to not give up on it, but make that a secondary concern. A.J. Brown can stretch the field. A.J. Brown, if he got the ball really anywhere, he was a danger to make anything happen. You've seen what he's done with that Philadelphia Eagles offense ever since he joined. And honestly, trading A.J. Brown was the worst thing the Tennessee Titans have done in a franchise in a long, long time. They have not replaced that production at the wide receiver position remotely close to an acceptable rate, and that's why they were picking number 1 overall in this last year's NFL draft. But reuniting Jonnu Smith with Arthur Smith, I think maybe gives the Steelers offense another element that they didn't previously have. I think Pat Freiermuth is a fine tight end, but what Jonnu Smith gives them is a little more offensive flexibility. And for a team that did trade their number 2 wide receiver in George Pickens to Dallas not too long ago, you need more weapons in the passing game. And that was my biggest concern. Like, yeah, Aaron Rodgers might be a little bit more of an upgrade than what you had last year with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. I don't think it's a massive upgrade by any means, because I think Aaron Rodgers athletically is a lot more limited, and you're not getting the Aaron Rodgers that was winning MVPs with the Green Bay Packers. But you get a solid quarterback who should, for the most part, keep the ball out of harm's way. Probably not going to throw for 350, 400 yards in many games this upcoming year. But if you surround him with enough talent of guys who can make plays with the ball in their hands, then maybe you can put an offense around him that will highlight what he does well. And Jonnu Smith's one of those guys who's great after the catch, and he's great at breaking tackles. And if there's anybody in the NFL, any offensive coordinator who can take that guy and put him in the best position possible, it's Arthur Smith. So when you look at the trade at face value and you just see straight up Minkah Fitzpatrick going to Miami, Jalen Ramsey going to Pittsburgh, you might think it's a little counterintuitive for Pittsburgh, right? Because trading one of the best safeties in the game at the height of his powers probably isn't the most ideal thing if you're a Steeler fan. But getting a guy in Jalen Ramsey who maybe isn't shutting down half the field, but is still a really good cornerback, but also getting another weapon on offense that you really needed, especially after trading away your number 2 wide receiver, is going to help out a lot. It changes how I view this Pittsburgh Steeler offense a little bit. Not by a ton. I still don't think they're going to win that division. But I think when they play the Cincinnati Bengals twice, and the Bengals defense still being suspect, we don't know what they're doing with Trey Hendrickson. We don't know if Shamar Stewart's going to suit up because he didn't go through any of the OTAs for Cincinnati because of a dispute over the contract. There's enough turmoil there, and they were bad enough defensively last year that almost anybody could score on them. If you could still force turnovers against the Cincinnati Bengals, you could still beat them. I don't think they're better than the Ravens right now, and dare I say it, I might be leaning towards Baltimore to go to the Super Bowl again, only for them to lose to Kansas City at some point. But I think this trade benefits the Steelers offensively just as much as it does by bringing in Jalen Ramsey on defense. The Jonnu Smith element is intriguing, and this offense is a lot more interesting than we probably would have thought of it before this. Now you look at it, they've got a few good pass-catching options with DK Metcalf, Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth. They're probably going to be running a lot of 12 or 13 personnel where there's one running back or either 2 tight ends or 3 tight ends, and no offensive coordinator in the NFL ran 13 personnel more last year than the Steelers' Arthur Smith. This is at least an offensive unit that is tailored to what your offensive coordinator specializes in. Now the question is, can the Steelers run the ball well enough to make the addition of Jonnu Smith a net positive? And I think they can. I like what they did. They didn't re-sign Najee Harris. They let him walk. Najee goes to Los Angeles to play for the Chargers. But you drafted Caleb Johnson, who I believe, outside of Ashton Jeanty, was the best running back available in this year's draft. Caleb Johnson at Iowa did what Iowa running backs do, and that's be the focal point of the offense, get enough first downs, help you win low-scoring games. But they also kept Jacob Warren in the backfield, who honestly isn't a bad option if you're a fantasy football player because he's going to get more carries this year. But Jacob Warren's an efficient running back, and even in smaller workloads than someone like Najee Harris, was more efficient and is a really good pass catcher in his own right. So the Steelers have two running backs with different running styles that you can rely upon to be able to at least move the ball up and down the field. The thing that's made the Steelers so good the last couple of years, or at least good enough to make it to the playoffs, despite suspect offenses, is the defense. Do I think you downgrade a little bit by virtue of just swapping Ramsey and Fitzpatrick? Yes. How much of one? I don't think it's that steep. Because I think there is some benefit to adding Jalen Ramsey. When it comes to maybe projecting where this team is going into next year, I think they can compete for that 2 spot, but they're not better than Baltimore. And that's the big thing. How good is Aaron Rodgers? How healthy can he be for an entire 17-game season? And do you have the pieces around him to highlight what his strengths are? I think adding Jonnu Smith is a step in the right direction. And I think trading for DK Metcalf earlier this year was a step in the right direction. It makes them an intriguing team. I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender, but I think what today did was make them a little more intriguing going in to next season. In college football, we talk about contracts in the NFL all the time, good ones, bad ones, but in college football, we're in a new landscape. We're in a new era post-house settlement where schools are now signing players to revenue-sharing deals. What those revenue-sharing deals look like varies a lot from school to school. Well, there's one school in the ACC that might be doing this the wrong way, and I don't exactly love the language that's in some of their contracts. I'll tell you who that school is and what exactly they have going on as it pertains to signing players to revenue-sharing deals in the new era of college athletics as the postgame show continues. Well, I don't love being the bearer of bad news. I like giving good news. Not so much bad news. But we were monitoring the P.J. Dean commitment today. A defensive lineman out of Clemens, North Carolina at West Forsyth High School. 6'5", 255 pounds. A guy who, according to 24/7 Sports, is a 4-star, rated 142nd nationally and the 9th best player in North Carolina. Chose the Georgia Bulldogs over South Carolina today. A rare recruiting L for the Gamecocks this offseason. The recruiting's been going great. And we've seen South Carolina improve their ranking over the course of the last couple weeks, as it's really been one of the better times for recruiting right now. And P.J. Dean, felt pretty hopeful around here that there was a chance that he could be suiting up for South Carolina. Did ultimately choose Georgia. A defensive lineman, an elite defensive lineman prospect, choosing the Georgia Bulldogs. Not really a surprise to anybody, considering they've done nothing but produce NFL players on the defensive side of the ball the last few years. But here's one thing that I've always loved about talking about college football and recruiting. It's one thing to tell me how many stars a website has them. Like this one, like 24/7. This is why I've got them pulled up here right now. Has them as the 142nd ranked player nationally, the number 23 defensive lineman nationally, the number 9 player in the state of North Carolina. But you know how I know he's good? His final 3, the schools that he was choosing between today to really declare where he was going to play: Georgia, South Carolina, Ohio State. That tells me enough. I'm sure that, kid can play pretty well. Without having to watch much of his highlights or his tape, I can tell P.J. Dean, pretty good football player when the 3 schools he's choosing from are South Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio State. So P.J. Dean, much to the chagrin of Gamecock fans, will not be coming to Columbia, at least for now, is just a hard commit to Georgia. But as Terry talked about a lot a couple hours ago on the halftime show, commitments at this level don't always mean they're going to play there. But his intention going into his senior year of high school is that he'll be playing for the Georgia Bulldogs. I teased at the end of the last segment that in today's world of college football, now that we are post-house settlement, contracts are now a thing. They kind of were with NIL. I mean, you signed NIL deals for players to get them to come to your school. But now you're having to distribute your TV revenue. And every school has a cap of $20.5 million of their TV revenue that they can give out to athletes. And some of these are contracts that are going to look different from school to school. Pretty significantly. I can imagine there's going to be a large difference from school to school. But one school that has been reported on, Chris Hummer from CBS Sports came out with this article last week. I've been waiting to get to this because I think this could be an example of a school doing the revenue sharing contract maybe the wrong way for a few reasons, right? There are a couple of things that they do that when I read it, it kind of raised an eyebrow. It kind of didn't feel like it was a great deal for the players, and Chris Hummer did a fantastic job reporting this because he took some of the things that he obtained from one of Florida State's TV revenue sharing contracts for this player and jotted some things down and asked a few other coaches or directors of player personnel and other power conferences and kind of asked the question, is this normal? So here's a couple of the things that he reported that were in one of these contracts for Florida State that might not sit well with a few. Quote, the Seminoles have included what those agents describe as aggressive language in their rev share contracts, which cover a broad range of issues and are issued directly by the school. One clause, which CBS Sports has seen a copy of, allows the team to extend a player at the end of their contract unilaterally without having to negotiate with the player. Another section on team rules, common in most NIL or rev share deals, includes a maximum $2,500 fine on the first offense if a player loses team equipment such as a pair of cleats. The maximum fine for using a controlled substance for the first time is $1,000. There is another clause about things that would constitute a breach of contract. Among them is, quote, illness or injury which is serious enough to affect the value of rights granted to the school. The way it's written allows Florida State to renegotiate or even cancel a player's contract at its discretion after any sort of injury, among other potential liquidated damages provisions included as part of the contract, including those that happen on the football field. Now, it goes on to say here some of the things that are pretty standard when one of the agents looked over it, but they did take in to account that this is the language pretty adversarial. You sign this contract and you lose a pair of cleats, well, that's going to cost you $2,500. If you get hurt on the football field and the school deems that you're taking away from the value of what they are in terms of revenue, they can terminate your contract just by injury, right? There's not a lot of seemingly not a lot of protection for the player if something was to happen that was beyond their control. Like Jordan Travis, for instance. Let's take a player that has played at Florida State here recently. Jordan Travis, famously, the reason that Florida State did not get into the college football playoff was his injury against North Alabama, where he suffered a pretty gruesome injury that kept them out of it. If he had one of these contracts, Florida State can just terminate it right there, according to this story on CBS Sports. And the crazy thing is when this was told to other GMs, this was the reaction. This is from the story as well. Said one Big Ten general manager of the three stipulations above, quote, "That's not normal." Said a GM from the Big 12, "I do understand they have all the leverage, but bleep." Yeah, he goes on to say a word that I can't say on the airwaves or else I will get in trouble with the FCC. I find this interesting because Florida State's in a weird spot where they had a bad year last year, obviously 2-10. They went and hit the portal hard, and they're trying to bounce back. And this is a program that clearly under Mike Norvell is going to lean heavily on the transfer portal for success. Now, a couple of years ago, when they were undefeated and won the ACC, a lot of the key players on that team were transfer portal players. Guys like Jared Verse, who was an Albany transfer and on the defensive side of the ball was healthy all year long, was good enough to make himself a first-round pick in that next April's NFL draft. They relied heavily on those transfer portal players. A lot of roster turnover last year. They go 2-10. But if you're going to rely heavily on transfer portal players and trying to make Tallahassee a hub for really good talent in the world of college sports free agency to come visit, the adversarial language in the contract, I think, would turn a lot of people off, especially if they can extend your contract without having to negotiate with you. And it goes on to say in that article, too, that some of the negotiations won't allow for players to have representation, like an agent, which also doesn't seem like a great deal if you're a player. If you're someone transferring to Florida State and you have a fantastic year, say you weren't slated to start, but something happens and you have to be thrusted into action early, and you end up proving your worth, and you say take Florida State to the ACC title game and get really close to competing for the college football playoff. You can't negotiate anything else. You kind of you're at the school's mercy. And I think a lot of what we're experiencing today in the world of college athletics with the House settlement and with what other schools are trying to implement is trying to get that power imbalance back. For years, it was the schools having the power over players, and whether it be player movement, obviously compensation wasn't something that was supposed to be discussed out loud because that was still illegal for a long time. But now today's era of college football, where third-party NIL collectives can offer a ton of money to players, it's an unregulated market. Players can up and go whenever they want in their transfer portal windows. The power has shifted a little bit over to athletes. But what some of the language in these Florida State contracts show that it is an aggressive reach to pull and gain some of that power back into the hands of the schools. And there's really no better example than having the ability to terminate a contract if there's an injury, fining a player $2,500 for, say, misplacing cleats, and then also not allowing them to use a third party or representative to negotiate anything else when a term is up, and them giving themselves the ability to extend a contract without the player being part of that discussion. It does seem like an overcorrection, an aggressive overcorrection. And based off of the responses from the other anonymous, whether it be Big 10 or Big 12 general managers or directors of player personnel, it kind of shows that I don't think everybody's operating this way. And it seems like the Florida State thing is an outlier. But if you're a school, like Florida State, maybe taking this approach isn't going to help you a lot. And I think time's going to tell, too. If they continue, now that the reporting's out, maybe they backtrack on some of the language in these contracts. And they do make it to where it is not as adversarial. And they make it more of a place where it's more enticing and player-friendly. This public backlash can maybe result in that. That's a potential domino that can fall as just a byproduct of Chris Hummer's reporting. And again, if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it because it is a fascinating look at just to what some of these new deals are going to look like now. This was posted on June 26th, so last week. But if I'm Florida State, this is not the approach that I'm taking. If I'm any school, this is not the approach that I'm taking. You try to find a proper balance between having power as a school and an athletic department while also giving players and athletes at any sport a feeling of having some say and control as well. Striking that balance is what's going to create the more successful athletic departments and programs in college athletics in a post-House settlement college sports landscape. But if we're looking for schools that might be doing this the wrong way, look no further than Florida State. Interesting thing to keep monitoring as more and more info about these type of contracts slowly start to leak out once the settlement finally kicks in tomorrow. Terry Ford's coming into the studio, going to hang out with me a little bit, and little does Terry know, we're going to play a game with him. It's going to involve game show music, and it's going to make Jay Phillips very jealous because we're playing game show music without him. We'll do all that and more as we continue the second hour of the show. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with many accidents to get to you. They're causing issues on the roadways this afternoon, starting with one on Bush River Road near US 176 at Broad River Road, Clemson Road near US 1 and 2 Notch, Garner's Ferry Road near Fort Jackson Boulevard, another one on Garner's Ferry Road, this one near I-77, and on I-77 southbound, we have an accident at Bluff Road near Exit 5, Summit Parkway near Summit Center Drive, Sumter Street at Taylor Street, and Sumter Street at Gervais Street. A disabled vehicle is causing some issues there, as well as an accident on 2 Notch at Windsor Lake Boulevard and Main Gate Drive. All right, we have company. I joined him for a few segments. He joins me for a few segments. It's a symbiotic relationship around here on the game. Terry Ford has been pulled from his perch up on the 19th floor, has been dragged into hanging out with me for a couple segments.
Let's see, do office work with office people or come talk basketball. This is not a tough choice.
It's not. Not at all. Absolutely not. We had a fun discussion earlier today on the halftime show, talking about what LeBron James opting into his $52 million option means. Terry's convinced that this is LeBron getting himself some public leverage to maybe put himself into a trade to send him out of Los Angeles.
I think it's a couple things. I think it's A, you lay your your $52 million parachute, right?
It's an expensive parachute.
So you opt in. So worst comes to worst, what do you got here, Elijah? You're settling for $52 million. Wow, tough world. B, if you can, because you have a no trade clause, can you leverage yourself to a city that you think has a better chance of winning a championship than L.A., which I don't think there is, personally.
I think that pool is a lot more limited now than it ever has been.
Thanks to the dreaded second apron. But, and third, I just really believe, I don't know how much of it, it could be 84%, 22%, 17%. Third. I think part of this is ego. If nothing else, LeBron James, his ego is butthurt that for the first time in his basketball playing life, his team is not centered around him. This team is being built for Luka, not for LeBron anymore. And I think LeBron's been in L.A., 7 years now, I think it is, or something like that?
Has it been 7 years already?
I think it has been.
It's close.
So I think LeBron, look, when you've always been the dude, we're talking about your whole life. We're not talking about in the NBA.
He was considered the chosen one by Sports Illustrated at age 16.
Exactly. So your entire basketball playing life have been the guy that everybody's doing We Are Not Worthy from Wayne's World to, right? Now you're not anymore. Now it's Luka, and you're almost like, look, ready? Ask Batman if you ever want to become Robin.
No, absolutely not.
Because you're bleeping Batman, right? You're the Green Hornet. You don't want to be Kato, no offense. So, do you think LeBron wants to be Robin to Luka Doncic's Batman?
Absolutely not.
So, again, I don't know how much of this is that ego talking, or if he's just throwing stuff out there to see what kind of feelers the Lakers would actually get. But you and I talked about this. If you want to be objective for a minute and wipe out ego, wipe out everything, wipe out that nasty loss to Minnesota in the first round of the NBA playoffs. If you're LeBron and you're truly about going as deep as you can into the postseason, what does LA have? 25-year-old superstar, one of the best offensive talents in the game, and a generational player in Luka. A better than we want to give credit to because the way he looks, shooting guard in Austin Reeves.
Oh, he's awesome.
And we don't want to give him credit.
Last year.
Yeah, but he kind of looks. You ever had that guy? And you played a lot of ball. The dude that walks in the gym looking like Austin Reeves, and you go, this guy can't play a lick. And then he goes out there and torches you for 2 hours.
Yeah, drops 25 on you, and there's nothing you can do to stop him.
Because you can't. And you're going back down the court going, how is the guy that looks like this basically tearing me up? Well, that's Reeves. I think we don't want to give him credit because we look at him and go, that's not a ball player. He's a ball player.
He's good.
He's really good.
That guy developed so well over the last couple of years.
Yes. So you got those two pieces, and then you put in LeBron. Now, do you have to defer now to Luka? Sure. Do you have to be more of a facilitator than a scorer because of Luka? Are you going to get less shots because of Luka? And now you have to have more move without the ball opportunities or some of these other things? Yes. Is it true that you're 40 years old? Yes.
A lot of mileage on those tires.
You also can rest a little bit. And LeBron's not the defensive player he used to be because he can't be, even if he wanted to be.
Not for 82 games.
No. So I guess my point, and obviously you tell me what you think, I think his best spot with the second apron situation in the NBA is just to keep your butt in L.A., swallow your ego, and go all in on this is really your last dance.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Even the release from Rich Paul in Clutch Sports talking about they're focused on being in a position to win a championship. The second apron rules are tough, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Boston just had to get rid of 2 players that were starters and key contributors on a championship team. 2 guys I don't think they win that championship without. You can't afford to keep everybody. And really, where are you going to send LeBron to that can afford to keep him?
All right, let's play the game real quick. All right, let's look at the contenders in the NBA. You saw what Boston just did, right? So Boston is out. Cavaliers are in the second apron now. So Cavaliers out.
Yep, can't add anybody.
Indiana. I mean, you probably could, but here's the second
But you're not
thing.
playing with Tyrese Halliburton because he's not playing this.
Exactly. There's no Halliburton. And what pieces are you willing to give up? Because, again, if you're the Lakers, you want young core players that are cheap, and you want future draft assets. Am I right?
Yep.
What's Indiana going to give up to get LeBron?
You giving up
for a year or two? Yeah. Are you willing to do that?
I don't think so. It would be counterintuitive for Indiana, and you're wasting a year of LeBron James because you don't get him to pair with your best player.
Right. Who, by the way, is a point guard who the offense will run through in Halliburton. So now LeBron, look, Luka's better than Halliburton, but you're putting yourself in the same situation in Indiana as you are in L.A., right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, who am I missing in the East? Anybody else? New York, the Knicks.
Philly, maybe?
The Knicks and Philly. I think Philly's paying a lot of dudes a lot of money. They're probably not far from the second apron off the top of my head.
Well, between Embiid and Paul George alone, yeah, that
now you just
takes up everything.
And you threw Maxey extra dough now.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do? I mean, and if you're L.A., are you willing to take, let's say, Paul George, who's from Los Angeles? Are you willing to take Paul George, who's coming off maybe the worst year of his career, and that contract for LeBron and his contract? No, you want, again, pieces of Philly. Maxey? You want Maxey's not, again,
Pairing him with Lucas would be counterintuitive.
Yes,
from
exactly.
a basketball sense.
So, again, that's clunky. The Knicks, okay, you take LeBron, they take the ball to Jalen Brunson. Look, one of my biggest complaints on the Knicks is they played Brunson ball in the fourth quarter, and 4 guys stood around and watched Jalen Brunson either try to score or throw some half-butt pass with 3 seconds on the shot clock because people had stopped his drive. So you're going to put LeBron with that guy? And I love Jalen Brunson in a lot of ways, but how good of a connection is that? You help me.
Yeah, not the greatest basketball fit. And you'd have to give up probably Mikal Bridges, maybe, or Karl Anthony Towns. I think the Lakers probably went Towns in that deal.
Yeah, they want Towns and either Bridges or Anunoby, one of the two. Probably take Bridges because Anunoby's always hurt.
He is.
So, again, what are we doing here to clearly put yourself in a better spot than you are with the Lakers? I guess that's my point. Oklahoma City's not doing it. Houston's not doing it. Denver's not doing it. I mean, Kroenke's whining about the second apron already.
He already brought up potentially trading Nikola Jokic. Unprompted.
Exactly.
Unprompted.
That was a real smooth move by him, wasn't it? Nobody went to executive school. But, okay, so let's say, look at Denver. You got to give, again, the Lakers, Aaron Gordon, not the defender he used to be, still a good defender, and a guy that's going to be a number 3 or 4 option on a good team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Michael Porter's everything is stopped. We thought he was going to advance to be a certain type of player. Hey, he's okay. What are you giving up in Denver with draft assets and also young players for LeBron James?
Nothing.
So I think we've spun this around to where the best place to be is where
he's already got. You can't be with the one you love. Love the one you're with.
So I do think it's fascinating that they tried to put themselves in a position where A, we still got the $52 million, and B, we want to look for something better for quote unquote championship or ego. But you brought up a point. Well, why don't you opt out?
Because
then you're a free agent.
Yeah, you just won't be able to make as much money because of, again, the vaunted second apron.
And would teams like to have LeBron? You made a good point when you were yapping with me. The off the court things, you're going to make more money with branding LeBron James. You just are. But you can't pay him what he's getting right now because of the second apron. And is LeBron James' ego going to accept 35, and ready for this, accept a paltry 35, 40 million to play basketball for you?
Compared to the 52 he's going to be making this upcoming year.
Right.
Yeah. Fair question.
So it all circles back to staying with the Lakers.
It does, which makes me happy. Which this is the direction I wanted to go, was to get back to staying in Los Angeles. Before we get hit to the break right here, today's start bench drop.
Go for it.
From a viewership perspective.
Okay.
College football playoff, NCAA basketball tournaments, NCAA baseball tournament.
For me?
Yes.
Oh, that's easy. I would see. I love the NCAA basketball tournament like nobody's business. I started. I benched the college football playoff, and I cut the baseball playoff.
I think with the advent of squeeze play over the last couple of years, I think I'm swapping baseball tournament and college football playoff.
Really? Look at you go, man!
It's such a cool experience. It's so.
I have not experienced a squeeze play.
Oh man!
So will that change my world about this?
An incredible sentence I never thought I would hear on air and radio, but I want to tell you, you have to experience the squeeze play yourself.
Okay, all right.
It's worth the ESPN Plus.
I will give it a whirl, man.
Usually we do Jay or Nay to end the second hour, but today it's Terry or Scary. We'll do that when the post-game show returns. Normally at this time every day, it's Jay or Nay. But with Terry in the hot seat now, it's time to do Jay's favorite thing and play the game show music and place Terry or Scary. This is either a Terry Ford take or it's a Scary Ford take.
I'll agree with Jay. Everything's better with game show music.
I feel like I can debate the merits of ways of watching paint dry while this playing in the background and still enjoy doing it.
Exactly. No matter what we say, it's just okay.
You can't be sad listening to this.
No, it's fantastic.
I feel like if I'm ever going to start breaking bad news over the air, I'm just going to do it with this behind it. That way it might take away a little bit.
Because it just feels the price is right. Just,
They don't call
it's a fun world.
It is. It absolutely is. And I feel like I should be having those little lawn mics doing this.
Good got.
Terry or Scary? The Steelers, by virtue of also getting Jonnu Smith in the trade, actually won today's deal.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a money component in this as well with Miami. They got two guys making bazillions of dollars, and Tua and Tyreek Hill. But Jonnu Smith is the wild card here no one's talking about. Look, not to be mean, Jalen Ramsey isn't the player he used to be. Minka Fitzpatrick is not the player he used to be. But Jonnu Smith just had the best year of his career. And you know Arthur Smith. You watched Arthur Smith. He loves a two tight end offense.
And I watched him use Jonnu Smith in Nashville.
Yeah, so you take Smith and Freiermuth, who I think is a very nice young tight end. You put those two guys in that personnel package, you're going to cause mismatch problems for defenses, which will help really maybe Aaron Rodgers to his strengths at this point in his career. Mm-hmm. I think the Jonnu Smith part of this is what makes this trade so good for the Steelers. No offense to Ramsey, no offense to Minka. Jonnu Smith remember, they were talking about getting him, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. So, excellent move for Jonnu Smith.
I think put him squarely in the number 2 spot if the Bengals can't prove that they can stop anybody in that division.
Yeah, they don't need defense. They just spent $7 billion on offense.
That's right. Yeah, they just win games.
Joe
in the
Burrow
50s.
can cover people.
Surely. Yeah, surely.
Why not?
Or we can score 60 points a game and
Why
it does
not?
not matter. All right. Terry or Scary? Our Twitter audience has it correct that expecting 8 wins or more for this season is a reasonable level of expectations as opposed to college football playoff or bust.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, look, we all want to see the Gamecocks hit the college football playoff. Duh, obviously. But I think with all the moves you had to make on the defensive side of the ball, think about it. I think Mike Yuva put it up. Out of the top 13 guys who took snaps last year on defense for South Carolina, 9 of them are gone.
That's a lot.
Plus, you're replacing the
major
entire interior of your offensive line. And your running back situation's a little clunky because of the NCAA. If you can get 8, 9 wins, or who knows more, but at least 8 or 9, I think that's a good season when you see all the turnover on defense myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 8 and 4 would even be a fantastic season just because there's a good chance that Alabama, Oklahoma, Missouri, and A&M are significantly better than we give them credit for. And Ole Miss. Oh, there's a good chance if Ole Miss's quarterback hits, then it's a Lane Kiffin offense, and you got to play him on the road.
Yeah,
It's going to be tough.
I'm with you.
All right, last one. Terry or Scary? Carlos Alcaraz defends his title. He wins Wimbledon.
No. He almost got beat today,
He
by the way.
almost got, he played around a little bit today.
Yeah, when you play with your food.
Yep. He was playing with his food a little bit today.
He
He really was. He sweated it out.
I think he gets beat. Sinner had him beat at the French and let him off the
He
mat.
did. Yes.
Sinner should have beaten Alcaraz. Well, when Alcaraz is like best surface. Alcaraz is really good at Wimbledon, but I think someone gets him. I don't think Alcaraz will win at Wimbledon. I repeat, no.
Because if he wins, then we're going to have discussions of does he end up putting himself in that Federer, Nadal, Djokovic?
That is such rare air.
He would be in that trajectory as young as he is.
You think about those 3 guys and what they accomplished all in the same era. If any of those guys were Americans, they'd have statues.
Andy Roddick almost has a statue, and he just won
Won
US
one.
Open. Yeah, he just won one.
Because he ran into those dudes. I mean, that was fun, bud. I enjoyed that.
Good
That was
stuff.
cool.
Thank you, Terry Ford. The final
thanks.
hour of the postgame show coming up. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. A few accidents to get to you. They're causing some issues on the roadways, starting with one on Clemson Road near US 1 and 2 Notch, O'Neill Court at Parkland Road, Summit Parkway near Summit Center Drive. A disabled vehicle is causing some issues on Sumter Street at Gervais Street here downtown, and an accident has caused some issues on Sumter Street at Taylor Street, so a couple of delays over on Sumter. And lastly, an accident's been reported here in the last 30 minutes or so, 2 Notch Road at Windsor Lake Boulevard and Main Gate Drive. Five o'clock news helps us kick off the final hour of the post-game show starting right now. I'm Elijah Campbell, no Jay Phillips today, and they will not be Jay Phillips tomorrow or the next day, so I'll be hanging out with you up until 6 o'clock. Time to get into the news of the day. You heard me talk about it with Terry Ford in the last hour, last segment really. The biggest news of the day in the NFL, the Steelers and Dolphins engaging in a little off-season tomfoolery. This is from ESPN. The Miami Dolphins have agreed to trade three-time All-Pro cornerback Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith to the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for three-time All-Pro safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and a pick swap. I believe, the Dolphins will be sending a 27 seventh-round pick to the Steelers, and the Steelers will receive a 27 fifth-round. Or no, the Dolphins are getting the fifth-rounder, 27. The Steelers are getting the seventh-rounder. So that is the trade. Now, very rarely in the NFL do you get three-time All-Pro defensive back traded for a three-time All-Pro defensive back, and that's what makes this a very compelling story. But Terry and I talked about it in that last segment. I talked about it to kick off the second hour of the show. What makes this trade intriguing is that the Miami Dolphins threw in Jonnu Smith. Now, Jonnu Smith, solid tight end, had a career high in catches last year and in yards, caught for well over 800 receiving yards last year, a very productive tight end, but there is a connection between Jonnu Smith and Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. They were together in, I believe it was 2021 and 2022 with the Tennessee Titans in Nashville, and those were some of the best seasons that Arthur Smith had as the offensive coordinator, and it helped get him the head coaching job with the Atlanta Falcons. But for anyone that's watched an Arthur Smith offense, you realize how important the tight end position is to what his offensive philosophy is. Last season, in the Athletics reporting on this trade, they cited that Arthur Smith ran more 13 personnel than any offensive coordinator in the NFL. That's when there's one running back and three tight ends on the field. He did that well over 100-plus snaps last year. And whenever he was the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans and they had a dominant run game with Derrick Henry, they mostly ran 12 personnel. So one running back, which was Derrick Henry, and then two tight ends. Jonnu Smith, oftentimes one of those tight ends. But not only is he a really good pass catcher, he's a great athlete that can make guys miss and also break tackles. That's why when he was a Titan, Jonnu Smith was oftentimes used in a variety of different ways. Obviously, blocking, running routes, and catching the ball, but he also would take jet sweeps. He would also take handoffs out of the backfield. Like there would be times where they would line up Jonnu Smith as a running back and give him the ball. There was one play I remember when covering the Titans in that 2021 season where he took a handoff 70-plus yards for a score against the Houston Texans at home. And it was just so funny to be able to watch a tight end just take a handoff like that and then just run through the line of scrimmage. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to take Jonnu Smith and use him as a de facto running back, but there's a multitude of ways that you can use him. And for someone like Jonnu Smith, if there's anybody that's going to get the most out of him, it is Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. So I think that's as every bit of intriguing as just the 3-time All-Pro defensive back for 3-time All-Pro defensive back swap with Minkah Fitzpatrick and Jalen Ramsey. And really, I favor the Steelers in this trade only because you add that extra element of offense that's going to help Aaron Rodgers out a lot. If the Steelers can prove they can run the ball really well, and they've got a solid backfield with Warren and Caleb Johnson, who they drafted out of Iowa, the offensive line shows up and plays well, and they're able to run the ball, and they can have Aaron Rodgers work out a play action, something he did very well his entire career, then you're going to maximize what you have in the year you have with Aaron Rodgers. It might not look like it did with the New York Jets. That being said, this still feels like a 10-win team max. But if the offense oversees expectations, then maybe they can be a dark horse in the AFC. I certainly almost like where they're at right now as much as I do Cincinnati. And, of course, the defense is a big part of what makes Pittsburgh so good. We'll see what type of effect it has swapping one of the best safeties in the game for Jalen Ramsey, who for the longest time was one of the best cornerbacks in the game. But a healthy Jalen Ramsey, who's coming off of playing all 17 games last year with a pair of interceptions, is probably going to help them out a little bit. But that still remains to be seen for the Dolphins. I mean, you get to unload a little bit of Jalen Ramsey's contract because you're already paying a lot of money to guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill, and trying to be as cap-friendly as humanly possible. This helps them out a little bit. But in that same vein, the Steelers all over the news in the NFL today. There, as a report, Brooke Pryor, who does a fantastic job of covering the Pittsburgh Steelers for ESPN.com, reports sources, teams mull possible trade offers for Steelers TJ Watt. This is from the story. In recent weeks, multiple teams have been discussing whether they can trade for Pittsburgh Steelers standout pass rusher TJ Watt, who skipped the team's most recent minicamp, sources told ESPN's Adam Schefter. The Steelers haven't shown any willingness to deal Watt so far, but he's unhappy with his contractual situations, and sources believe outside team interest is likely to increase given Monday's trade that sent Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith from the Dolphins to Pittsburgh in exchange for Minkah Fitzpatrick. The Steelers have been adamant they want Watt to finish his career in Pittsburgh. Now, this is something to monitor. It's a report, and it's certainly something to monitor right now, because if the Steelers trade TJ Watt, then I don't love the Minkah Fitzpatrick trade for Jalen Ramsey as much, because part of what makes the Steelers so good is that you have one of the best edge rushers in all of football, a guy that at his peak can get to almost 20 sacks in a season. He's that level of player. And I think him being there combined with Minkah Fitzpatrick has made the Steelers a great defense. Look, if you have somebody that can rush the quarterback like that and decrease a quarterback's time to throw to where they can't read the defense in real time, with as good as NFL defenses are getting at deceiving and hiding what their coverage is going to be pre-snap, that's one of the reasons why Minkah Fitzpatrick has had some of these years where he's had a few pick sixes, where he's able to force a ton of turnovers, is because opposing quarterbacks have such little time to throw, they're forced into sometimes making really bad decisions. It's the front end helping the back end of the defense. It's a symbiotic relationship where they both help each other out, and it's good for the entire team. If you get rid of TJ Watt and you don't replace him with a like-for-like pass rusher, which you won't in a trade situation, the only way they trade him is if he's not happy with his contract, like reported, and you get him to a place that will make him happy with his contract. If that happens, then I think today, in the news that they made by trading for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, is all for nothing. So that's something to monitor here as we move forward. Staying with our 5 o'clock headlines, an interesting story kind of coming out of BYU right now. And it's put a guy in the transfer portal that we didn't expect to be in the transfer portal. Here is some reporting from Kyle Benagura, and I probably butchered that last name, so my apologies, Kyle, and Pete Thamel. And this comes from earlier today. Quote, a civil lawsuit accusing BYU quarterback Jake Retzlaff of rape has been dismissed, according to court records. The parties jointly agreed to dismiss with prejudice, ending the case, which was filed last month. None of the parties was immediately available for a comment. Retzloff now plans to transfer from BYU as he faces a possible 7-game suspension for violating the school's honor code by admitting to premarital sex during the legal proceedings, sources told ESPN. He has begun informing staff and teammates of his intention to leave. So earlier this offseason, there was an accusation made about BYU quarterback Jake Retzlaff over sexual assault, and in the process of that and the discovery, they did conclude that he violated BYU's honor code. So even with the dismissal of this case, if Retzlaff was to have returned to BYU, he would be suspended for 7 games. And for those not familiar with the honor code at BYU, look no further than what happened to Brandon Davies for the BYU basketball team back in the early 2010s. I believe it was the 2011 season. The guy who was the second leading scorer to Jimmer Fredette for a BYU team that went like 27-3 in the regular season. So for Retzlaff, this case has been dismissed, but the suspension would still loom, meaning that he is going to leave the school, and what his eligibility is going to look like for whatever school he chooses is yet to be seen, because this is not a transfer portal window. So that's another question that remains to be known, or if this is something that would allow him to open that up. I'm not 100% sure. Haven't been able to find a really good answer on that so far, but that does add a name, a quarterback, to a player pool that isn't very ripe with talent right now, because after the spring portal closes, teams are pretty much set on what their rosters are going to be. So I'm sure there is going to be some teams interested. I don't know a ton about the case in general, so I'm not inclined to speak on it, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of teams doing maybe more than what would be considered due diligence on this guy once he is available to be picked up. So interesting news there coming out of BYU, a team that honestly used his talents to get them on the cusp of the Big 12 title game. Really, the only reason they didn't get into the Big 12 title game was because of a tiebreaker with Iowa State. Really, there was a good cluster of teams at the top of the Big 12 standings that included Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. And some tiebreaker scenarios kind of made it to where Arizona State and Iowa State got to play in the conference title game. That's a 10-win BYU team that will be without their quarterback going in to next season. And as it pertains to the future of Jake Retzlaff, yet to be seen. So waiting for more to come out. That's also a developing story. In college football as well, it's now official. This is something that was a developing story until today, where it officially became a thing where the Pac-12 welcomes their 8th football member. Now, Gonzaga has joined the Pac-12. Gonzaga does not play football, so they have 9 in basketball, but Texas State officially welcomed by the Pac-12. This is from ESPN.com. Quote, Texas State has officially joined the Pac-12, the conference announced Monday, becoming the league's 9th member ahead of its relaunch in 2026. We are extremely excited to welcome Texas State as a foundational member of the new Pac-12, Commissioner Teresa Gould said in a statement. It is a new day in college sports and the most opportune time to launch a new league that is positioned to succeed in today's landscape with student athletes in mind. It goes on to say, too, that the Texas State Board of Regents voted to officially authorize the buyout. So there's a $5 million buyout to the Sun Belt Conference on Monday. And really, it doesn't seem like a ton of money compared to what some coaching buyouts have been over the years, but that was the fee they had to pay to get out of the Sun Belt and to go into the new look Pac-12. So for those keeping score at home, here is the new look Pac-12 for football only. That will be Texas State, Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, Oregon State, San Diego State, Utah State, and Washington State. A whole bunch of teams with state at the end of it, and a lot of them aren't states themselves. So it's a little confusing. Like Boise. Boise's not a state. Fresno's not a state. San Diego's not a state. But every single school in this conference that plays football will have state at the end of their name, something I didn't really realize until this very moment. But then once basketball and other sports kick in, Gonzaga will also be the league's 9th member. So the Pac-12, we say RIP Pac-12 because in spirit, it's gone. It's not the same as it was. But they're officially somewhat alive with a new roster of schools, and they'll be competing for a spot in the college football playoff as one of the group of 6 schools. I have a hard time imagining that the college football playoff would recognize this league as a power conference, giving them a bid into the college football playoff with their winner. They'll have to duke that out with the rest of the group of 6 conferences. That was our 5 o'clock headlines, as always, brought to you by our friends over at Integrated Media. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, I have questions for every single SEC team going into SEC Media Days. It's the thing that I want to hear their coaches answer to try to sell me on their team going into the 2025 season. I'll tell you what that is for every single SEC team, as well as we lead into the drive around the SEC here in a bit. SEC Media Days, 2 weeks away. We're getting awfully close to be in Atlanta, and that really kind of, for me, kicks off the official talking season point. But why wait for 2 weeks when we can go ahead and start right now? Because I've got some questions with these teams in the SEC and some of the coaches that are going to be speaking that I would like to hear about, right? It's one thing to read a roster. It's one thing to look at a team's situation on offense and defense, but you want to hear how coaches answer to those, right? And that's where I think we learned the most from SEC Media Days is kind of getting the pulse on where every team is coming into the 2025 season. And I think that's going to impact the South Carolina Gamecocks a lot because I look at that schedule and I see 4 games that I think are toss-ups. And then another intriguing question mark with Ole Miss, because I think a lot of what Ole Miss is really contingent on whether or not Austin Simmons has enough around him and is as good as advertised in a Lane Kiffin offense. Ole Miss can be really good. That's the game right now. I look at the schedule and I'm like, I don't know. I got no clue. But I got questions for every team because every team, you go into something like Media Days and you kind of break them down, I know I do, into 2 categories. What we know for a fact about this team and what remains to be seen and what we need to know and what we will learn as the season unfolds. So I looked through every single team in the SEC, looked at the situation, and asked myself one question for them on what I need to know going into the year and that I hope to find out at Media Days. Starting with 2 of the teams that I think are kind of on that top tier. I look at the league and I see Georgia, Texas, and then there's everybody else. Those are the 2 favorites to meet again in Atlanta, and I'm probably going to lean on picking them to play in Atlanta right now. I think Texas is probably maybe one of the 2 or 3 best rosters in college football. Very well funded. They're riding a high of success that they had last year of making the SEC championship game in their first year in the league. And who knows, they might be getting an upgrade at quarterback with Arch Manning as the number 1 guy over Quinn Ewers for a full season. So for Texas, my biggest question is how does the offensive line replace Kelvin Banks in other production? Because it's seemingly great everywhere else, but if that offensive line takes a dip, then they won't reach their full potential. Now, Kelvin Banks is one of the best offensive linemen in the SEC. I'm personally thrilled that he is a New Orleans Saint, and that's going to help them out for years to come. But that Texas offensive line might have been the best in college football last season. It helped out with their running game, a running game that saw their running back tear his ACL before the season started with C.J. Baxter, and then have a third-string running back with Wisner be really the head of one of the best running games in college football. That offensive line was running back proof, and that running game was running back proof. And now you got a couple of guys coming back with Wisner, with Wisner and C.J. Baxter, who should be fully recovered from his ACL injury last summer. But if that offensive line isn't what it was last year, you're not going to get the same type of running game. And Texas has plenty of weapons. And Arch Manning is still a question mark because we're operating with a small sample size. But if Arch Manning is just better than average with the weapons they have, with Steve Sarkisian as the play caller, who has really kind of separated himself as one of the best play callers in college football, this Texas team will fulfill its potential because that defense is disgusting. It's nasty. Colin Simmons is one of the best defensive linemen in America. Anthony Hill might be the best overall defensive player in America. Many people certainly believe so. They're good from front to back. Like the pass rush is great. The run defense looks to be solid. The linebacking crew is a really good group. And the secondary, even by losing Jahdae Barron, still a force to be reckoned with. Michael Taff is back. Gilbo is back. They have a couple of starters who were really productive last year, all returning. But the Texas thing, for me, kind of hinges in terms of them being a national champion or not, hinges on how good that offensive line can be next year because that's the most that they have to replace. Now with Georgia, we know Georgia's going to be great. We know they have defensive NFL prospects all over that side of the ball. But for me, is the wide receiver and tight end room strong enough around Gunnar Stockton to make the offense good enough to avoid the roadblocks they had last year? We saw Georgia lose 2 games in the regular season last year. It's the first time we've seen Georgia lose multiple games in the regular season in a hot minute. And a lot of that was because Carson Beck was the victim of bad wide receiver play, whether it's receivers missing blocks on the perimeter for the run game or miscommunication. There was an interception in the Alabama game where a wide receiver didn't get the change of play. Carson Beck called an audible. Memo didn't get to the wide receiver, and he was blocking when he should have been trying to catch a ball. Interception happens, helped Georgia lose that game. But that Georgia receiving group had as many drops last year as almost anybody in all of college football. And I genuinely believe that one of the things that kept Georgia from fulfilling their promise as a legit title team was that the receiving core and Oscar Delp at tight end just, quite frankly, weren't good enough to be a national championship team. Now, this year, they added some talent. They went into the transfer portal. The wide receiving position was a huge point of emphasis. But is it going to be good enough? Do they feel good enough to be able to open up the rest of their offense and expand on what already is a pretty good running game? I like Nate Frazier in the backfield. I like what they do running the ball. I like the offensive line. And I think Gunnar Stockton is solid enough to do what they want to do on offense. But if no one's catching the ball and you're still having the dropsies, well, you're going to limit yourself on what you can actually do next year. As it pertains to Alabama, now this is a team that's going to be coming to Columbia in October, a game that I think is incredibly winnable for South Carolina. But for Alabama, I just need to know, how has Ty Simpson progressed in his time at Alabama, and can that running back room be good enough to take advantage of a great offensive line? Now, if I have to put in a favorite for the Joe Moore Award winner, which is the award at the end of every year given to the best offensive line unit, I'm leaning Alabama. I mean, Parker Brailford is one of the best centers in college football, and he was a part of a Joe Moore Award winning offensive line unit at Washington just a few years ago. And then at left tackle, Caden Proctor is more than likely going to be a first-round pick in next year's NFL draft and widely regarded to be one of the most gifted offensive linemen in college football. Those two alone carry a lot of weight, but you have all types of five stars in that offensive line. Alabama might have the best protection unit in college football. But will the running game take advantage of that? If you look at it right now, it does kind of feel with Justice Haynes leaving in the transfer portal, and really it's kind of Jam Miller's backfield to lose. Is he a good enough running back to take advantage of the blocking ahead of him? Now, usually the offensive line makes the running back's job a lot easier, and they're going to make Jam Miller's job easier. But is Jam Miller ready to be that type of running back who can get you over 1,000 yards and increase the margin for error they have at quarterback? I'm not 100% sold on Ty Simpson, really. I don't know if I'm 50% sold on Ty Simpson. We've seen very little of him. Only one game in his career has he ever really started, and that was the disaster in Tampa a couple of years ago when they played at South Florida, escaped by the hair of their chin in the game that ultimately made Nick Saban have to go back to Jalen Milroe, and then they changed the trajectory of their year based off everything that happened after that. So I don't know about Ty Simpson. He's not taken meaningful snaps, really, at any point in his career. And sure, Alabama has done plenty of winning with replacement-level quarterbacks. I think of Greg McElroy and Jake Coker. That comes to mind. Those are two guys that I don't think are winning national championships on their own, but need help around them. But what helped those two guys was having Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry in those respective backfields. Both those dudes won Heismans, and they were the stars of that offense. So can Alabama have a running back unit and a quarterback good enough to take advantage of that offensive line? Because Ryan Williams is an elite wide receiver. We saw what he did last year as a reclassified freshman and having in what really one of the best individual performances we saw in the 24 season against Georgia. Is your quarterback good enough to get him the ball? Is your running back good enough to be able to take advantage of that offensive line and rush for over 1,000 yards? If that answer is yes, Alabama's back in the college football playoff. If it's not, I don't see it. And it might be a second straight year of Alabama being on the outside looking in of a 12-team playoff, and that wouldn't bode well for someone like Kalen DeBoer. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back, and we'll do the drive around the SEC, continuing my questions for every single team in the SEC heading into media days. We'll do that when the postgame show returns. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways. We're going to start with one on Highway 302 near Highway 6 and South Lake Drive over near Lexington. 2 accidents on 77 northbound, one's at Fort Jackson Boulevard near exit 10, the other at I-20 near exit 16. Also have accidents on North Lake Drive at Sunset Boulevard, O'Neill Court at Parkland Road, Pilgrim Church Road near South Carolina 6 and North Lake Drive, and then 2 on Sumter Street, one at Elmwood Avenue, and the other a disabled vehicle at Gervais Street. Time for a drive around the SEC, which today is a continuation of the previous segment, because I got questions for all these SEC teams as we go into SEC Media Days here in just a few short weeks. Hey, just blink, and before you know it, it's going to be here, and we'll be in Atlanta, and it'll officially be preview season for college football. I can't wait. Already in the mode for it. Already starting a lot of my preliminary research, and really the one thing I do every year is kind of ask these questions of these SEC teams, hear what the coaches have to say at Media Day, take some notes, and try to answer them myself and fill in the gaps, and it gives me kind of a confidence level about where I'm at with everybody in the Southeastern Conference. Ended the last segment talking about Alabama. Moving on to Arkansas, a team that I think is awfully intriguing. But what I need to know about the Hogs is this. How much help does Taylon Green have, and are they the right pieces to match his skill set? And I'm very high on Taylon Green. For those who listened to this show about a month or so ago, Jay and I did a start bench drop exercise where we had 3 SEC quarterbacks that we kind of put in the same tier of DJ Lagway from Florida, Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt, and Taylon Green from Arkansas. And I started Taylon Green. I think he's one of the most gifted quarterbacks in this league, and he's a 6'6" scrambler with incredible speed, a really strong arm, and a couple of things that make me feel like he can be the quarterback of an offense that excels here at the SEC level. He's got an incredible passing and running grade on PFF. The tape backs it up, and if he can really cut out some of those turnovers, you have yourself a quarterback who can win you games. But is there enough around him, and are they the right pieces? Now, Arkansas loses some pass catchers and a tight end that were really big parts of that offense last year. Do you replace them like for like? And right now, when I look at the roster, I'm not convinced they did. Omega Blake, someone that we're very familiar with here, started his career at South Carolina, then went to East Carolina. Maybe one of these guys who's going to get a lot of snaps at Arkansas. According to ourlads.com, which they do a really good job of projecting a lot of the depth charts, has Omega Blake as one of the main options as pass catcher. So if he's improved in his time and he's truly developed, then that can be. But as of right now, I'm not convinced they have the core around him to elevate the offense. Defensively, the Hogs also lose a lot. I was really kind of batting around the idea of having 2 questions and including the defense in the other because they just lost so many leaders. The linebacking core last year was really good. I honestly thought they had one of the better linebacking cores in the SEC. And that linebacking core being as good as it was one of the reasons they were able to upset Tennessee early in the year last year the way they did. But can Arkansas at least, if you're going to be a team that gives up some points, can you be equipped to win a shootout? The quarterback position for Arkansas tells me they can. The position groups around him at running back and receiver don't make me feel as confident. I expect the offensive line to be solid because if Sam Pittman's coaching your team, the guy is an offensive line guru, the Hogs will be good up front. But do they have the skill position talent around their quarterback to complete the picture? Yet to be seen. For Auburn, this is a team last year that if you subscribe to one-score game luck, then this is the perfect bounce-back candidate. They lost a ton of one-score games last year because they had some back-breaking turnovers. Peyton Thorne wasn't exactly a protector of the football. That's putting it nicely. Had a key turnover against Missouri on the road. Cost them that game. A key pick six at home against Oklahoma. Cost them that game. A key turnover in the California game at home. It cost them that game. A lot of games were cost. And they lost because they just couldn't take care of the ball. And they had a good roster. They just couldn't take care of the ball. And they lost a lot of one-score games. My question for Auburn is, are they good enough in the trenches, specifically on the offensive line, to kind of allow the influx of skill position talent they acquired to shine through? And can you protect Jackson Arnold well enough to avoid back-breaking turnovers that did cost them last year? You look at Auburn's team, and you look at bringing in Jackson Arnold, who at Oklahoma lost his job because when he was under pressure was really bad. If you look at some of the Pro Football Focus grades at how these quarterbacks, every quarterback in the SEC performed under pressure, they have a grade that they give quarterbacks for when they're specifically under an immense amount of pressure. And Jackson Arnold's last year was 31.7. That's the second lowest of all returning quarterbacks in the SEC. The only lower one was a 29 for Marcel Reed at Texas A&M. He was atrocious under pressure. If the offensive line's not very good and Jackson Arnold's under pressure constantly, then bringing in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech's not going to help. Having Cam Coleman on the outside, as great of an athlete as he is and as celebrated of a recruit as he was, isn't going to help. The ball can't get to those guys if Jackson Arnold has defenders in his face all game and he's constantly getting pushed to his rear end and constantly getting sacked. And it's one of those things, too, where if you look at the numbers in terms of quarterbacks who have their pressures turned to sacks, 27% of Jackson Arnold's pressures last year resulted in a sack. The only quarterback who was worse in that category returning in the SEC is Austin Simmons from Ole Miss. But you put an asterisk there because he's only had a handful of snaps. So if you had a snap count adjustment to that, Jackson Arnold was the worst at that in the SEC. And that's going to be a big question, is if the line's good enough and Jackson Arnold has clean pockets, then you'll see that type of improvement from Auburn going into next year. For Florida, can the defense keep you from having to win shootouts? And how can Billy Napier build on how last year ended? I think what saved Billy Napier's job is the tape DJ Lagway put out there and how they ended the year. I think beating Ole Miss probably carried a lot of weight when it came to Florida's decision to retain Billy Napier as the head coach. Defensively, they have a good roster on paper. And you like what you have on offense. They love DJ Lagway, and Lagway is one that I'm kind of on the fence on in terms of how I rank him, because you watch some of the throws, you watch some of the tape, and it wows you. He makes some incredible throws. But even in more limited snaps, he still turned the ball over 9 times last year, threw 9 picks. And he wasn't the full season starter because Graham Mertz was the starter until he tore his ACL against Tennessee in October. So Lagway, if he's turning the ball over a lot and you're getting in a lot of one-score games, you might find yourself on the wrong end of some one-score losses. And when it comes to Kentucky, well, what's the direction? I mean, at this point, narrowing it down to one question for Kentucky is really a fool's errand, because they didn't really kill it in the transfer portal. They lost a whole lot more than they brought in. That was a team that went 4-8 last year with a roster that I thought was really solid, especially given Kentucky's standards. But they're doing the quarterback carousel thing where they're picking a quarterback from the portal, and he's going to be a 1-year rental. I mean, you can basically consider Kentucky blockbuster the way they rely on rentals, right? Brock Vandegrift last year, Devin Leary before that, and Will Levis before that. It's a 1-year rental guy they're going to have with Zach Calzada they got from Incarnate Word. Can they get anything going in terms of getting that program a little bit of life? I think Mark Stoops is on a hot seat right now, and that's even given what he's done at Kentucky. They're not recruiting very well. They're not necessarily killing it in the portal. They just lost one of their longest tenured assistant coaches to a GM job at Louisville. Things aren't so great in Lexington, Kentucky right now. I just need to know what direction they're heading into. Moving on to LSU, can their defense get below 20 points per game? Now, 2 years ago, with Jaden Daniels at quarterback and having a historic offense, they put up video game numbers on that end. And Jaden Daniels had one of the most impressive seasons I've ever seen from a quarterback, and he clearly has carried that over into his NFL career. But the defense was so bad it cost him 3 games. The defense was better last year by virtue of them not being able to be any worse. So can their solid linebacking group, which I love Whit Weeks, I think he's a solid linebacker, can they figure out what they're going to do with Harold Perkins finally? And if Harold Perkins can stay healthy for the whole season, if they can just get that defense to below 20 points per game, I think that's a candidate for a dark horse winner in the SEC because the offense is loaded. I love the additions of Nick Anderson and Berrien Brown at wide receiver. They've given Garrett Nussmeier plenty to throw to. And they also have to replace Will Campbell and Emory Jones on the offensive line. If they replace those guys and Nussmeier just has a class 2 years, but if they can't stop anybody, then Brian Kelly's looking at a much warmer seat than he's currently sitting on because all that investment in the offseason could still result in an 8-4 or 9-3 season that sees them outside of the college football playoff if they continue to hemorrhage yards and points. We'll continue the rest of this list of the questions I have for teams in the SEC as we wrap up today's postgame show. Final segment of today's post-game show. As you've heard a couple of times throughout this, too, we are making some changes here at the game that are going to be announced tomorrow. I don't know what time. I just know they're being announced tomorrow. So stay tuned for those. Fun times here over at 107.5 The Game. Last segment, and I'm going through still the questions I have for each SEC team going into media days as we really kickstart truly previewing the college football season beyond what we just have here in Columbia, South Carolina with the Gamecocks. And I think the more we learn about these other teams going into the season, the more we can better project what a realistic expectation is for this Carolina team. Going back to the poll question from earlier today, it was our poll question of the day at 107.5 The Game. There's 16 hours left to vote on this thing, so if you want to have your voice heard, absolutely, we'll hear you weigh in. But the question was, what's your expectation level going into 2025 for the Gamecocks? College football playoff or bust? At least 8 wins? 500 or better? Or still have zero clue? 59% say at least 8 wins. 29% say it's playoff or bust. And 8% say 500 or better. 4% still yet to have a clue. And for our start bench drop today for postseason formats, college football playoff, NCAA basketball tournaments, NCAA baseball tournament, I want to go ahead and give mine. A lot of you have weighed in on our YouTube stream. My man, Craig Godwin, always appreciate him weighing in. He says, start the NCAA basketball tournament, bench the college football playoff, bench college football playoff, drop baseball. And we've had a few weigh in on our Twitter account as well. Give proper accreditation to this one. Chad says, start March Madness, the absolute best first week until the Masters. Bench the football playoff, because, some anticlimactic games, agreed. Dropping college baseball, but he says, perhaps I need to check it out on Squeeze Play, into which I respond, absolutely. Squeeze Play is the game changer. That honestly has changed how I view and get excited for the college baseball playoff or tournament every year. Andrew says, start basketball, bench baseball, cut football. And then Steven says, start basketball, bench the baseball tournament, dropping the football playoff. And I'm that same way. I definitely have been swayed by how cool Squeeze Play is. And that's the one that leapfrogged the playoff for me. The playoff's great. I love what the college football playoff is. In that semifinal day, whether it's, New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, one of my favorite days on the sports calendar, it just doesn't have that all-day feel like the college basketball tournament and the college baseball tournament have for me personally. So before we get out of here, I've got about a minute left, so I'll go ahead and give my question for Ole Miss. And this is a big game on the Gamecock schedule. This is the one where I'm doing what Jay calls the shruggy man emoji with this game, because I have no idea how good Ole Miss actually is going to be. I find them to be arguably the biggest mystery in the Southeastern Conference. But Austin Simmons at quarterback and replacing production everywhere, all across the field, offense and football. Can the portal king of Lane Kiffin get instant production and build the chemistry needed to beat so many teams that are light years ahead of them in that department? That's the big thing. And they have plenty of talent, and they always do well in recruiting rankings and transfer portal rankings. But when you overhaul the way they do year after year, you're going to get various results. The reason I was so high on them last year is they brought so much back. They added 2 with transfer portal acquisitions, but they brought a ton back, including at the quarterback position and a couple of key pass rushing positions as well. How that carries over this year, you got to be able to strike gold on a lot of positions. How much of that team chemistry can actually be built to where they're not digging themselves a hole and losing a game like they did last year to Kentucky. Thank you guys for joining in today. It'll be me again tomorrow. Looking forward to talking to you at 3 o'clock all the way up till 6. We'll see you then.